A lot of teachers think that using technology in the classroom is simply enough, but is it really? That's a guide that Susie Boss and Karen Kraus aim to tackle in Reinventing Project Based Learning, your field guide to the real world projects in the digital age. This book covers the concept of project based learning, a methodology that emphasizes the need for students to learn by actively approaching material and applying their own meaning to that work. Both authors bring in many years of experience to this book. For example, Susie Boss is a writer and consultant who has written for several well known outlets such as Edutopia, in addition to other works in improving education globally. Jane Krause is a former teacher who develops curriculum and other programs for the National Center for Women and Informational Technology. They've both worked together before on a couple of other books and are bringing that again in this one. So, as a little bit of background, I have read this book before. In fact, it's one of the few textbooks I have ever actually bought and then also kept. I had it for a course that was all about project based learning, and I found it so interesting. I decided I needed to keep it. So this is me rereading this book and coming back to it after a few years now. To me, it serves as a pretty great way of making learning fun. Obviously, through projects, but also as more engaging for students and teachers alike. Its thesis is that technology must serve to expand learning, not just replace what we were doing before. And that goes into the content. So, the content of this book is all about giving teachers easy access to read and understand instructions um, for, implementing these projects into their lessons. There's also a lot of ideas for teachers about tools to use, and which tools work best for each job and specific ideas that they want to implement. Also, the book makes sure to back up its methods with a lot of kind of reasoning, pedagogically, and just ethically about what to do. Several sections include a lot of talk about making sure these projects are equitable for students of varying degrees of educational competency. Now, for the analysis, as I said, this book focuses a lot on technology in the classroom, so it's a consistent topic of discussion. And a big thing within that is the challenging of our assumptions and traditions. A lot of talk is focused on what we were doing before and what needs to change to kind of fit with the 21st century. So, both Boss and Kraus do approach this very sensitively. They make sure to, there's a lot of anecdotes in the book, and they make sure to paint the teachers within those as sympathetic, not necessarily just curmudgeons who don't want to adapt with the times. Um, there's, a big focus of the first few sections is that teachers are still learners, and that we have to kind of, like our students, adapt to new things if we're going to learn and if we're going to make the best content for our students possible. Um, Project-based learning and that technology are always portrayed as boons to traditional teaching more than anything else. So I think it'll be very helpful as a book to um, people who are struggling, kind of adapting to modern day tech and implementing that into their lessons. Um, and and as I mentioned, the anecdotes are very helpful. It, for me personally, I saw a lot of places where, within my limited experience, even I could see myself needing to improve, just thanks to those little stories. Another big aspect of the book is tools and how this is one of the most frequently covered parts when discussing types of projects. And so they do a great job of including many kind of well-known tools such as Flickr or Google, and specifically like Google Slides or Google Docs within that you can use with your students, but also covering some tools that you may not have heard of or just kind of might be interesting to try out, such as chat rooms or random chat rooms or Zoom kind of meetings with classrooms from maybe say another part of the country, another part of the world, that could kind of give your students a different cultural context for what other kids are learning and maybe ways that they're similar too. Um, I do think this is where one of the big issues comes in. Unfortunately, I think a lot of teachers are going to struggle with accessibility here. Obviously, the book can't go into a ton of detail, but it doesn't really go into the basics of those softwares necessarily. It kind of gives a brief rundown of them, maybe a few sentences for most of the ones covered. There's some that are covered in a bit more depth, but even then, if this was a teacher that was technologically low on technological competence, for example, they would probably have a lot of issue kind of even getting started because of that. So I can see that as a big issue people have when approaching this book. Uh, and of course, uh, kind of tools themselves are a big part of it, but it's also kind of nothing without that framework. How are we doing these projects? And the book gives a lot of times to that kind of parts of effective lessons. So there's a lot of talk about how to manage a classroom, what are the best practices for, you know, that kind of stuff. Ordering a lesson, where do you start? Where do you put your assessments? Stuff like that. When is the best time for what type of assessment? To formative or summative or personally, this book is where I first learned a lot of those terms a few years ago, and it's just a lot of I think a lot of talk about kind of how to get the most out of project based learning in general, and I think this is the most universal and most appealing aspect of this book to anybody who would pick it up because it can be really applicable to anything, even if you are somebody who has struggles with those technologies that were mentioned before. The lessons about lessons are very detailed and very good just for really any kind of purpose in general. Any teacher at any kind of level could use them and get something really important, special out of them, regardless of technology use or not. So, overall, what do I think of this book? I think it's a really great guide to working with project based learning and technology, just in general. It's really a great book about lesson planning in general, too. I do find myself coming back to it every now and then to kind of pick up some tools about when I have to plan a lesson. Um, it's a great like springboard for anybody who wants to include that technology in their classrooms and wants to make their classroom more up to date and more engaging to the students. But as I said, there's that barrier to entry. Um, it's there's not much the book can do about that, unfortunately. Otherwise, it would be a you know much thicker than it actually is. Um, so there's only it does the best it can within a specific niche. Um, I would wish there were some more tools to included to even just get people started on how to use those kind of software and resources. Just but you know it's overall I think despite that shortcoming, uh, I think people will get a lot out of this. Even especially people who have the right amount of kind of know-how with technology. This is really an invaluable kind of resource for any educator. So that is my review of Reinventing Project Based Learning. Uh, Thank you.